still tracking your network inventory in spreadsheets? In this video, we are fixing that. I'll walk you through installing NetBox, which is a powerful modern source of truth for your network using Docker on Ubuntu. This will serve as the single source of truth for our network automation project in this series. By the end, you'd have a clean, scalable alternative to messy spreadsheet and a good foundation ready for our automation. So this is our NetBox interface, and as we can see, we would have options to organize our site, including which regions they are located. We can have multiple tenants on NetBox, and we can add our racks, devices, connections, power connections, wireless, IPAM, VPN, circuit, and all of that. So basically, it provides us all that we need to document our network in a single place. There are two ways that we can install NetBox. We can go the manual route, where we'll be responsible for installing the various components of NetBox. So like the database, caching, Redis, and all of that. So with the manual route, we'll do it on our own. Now this is involving because it gives us that control, but because we are starting out, we want to get the tool itself set up fast and easy, then we can focus on our actual automation. So in this video, we'll use the Docker version. Pretty simple and straightforward. The various components are pre-configured and packaged as container images. All that we need to do is to pull the repo, define the port on which we want NetBox to listen on, pull the container images, and start the containers. But you can see just a couple of steps and we are done. And because we want to log into NetBox, we'd need to create a user. In our demo today, we'll be installing NetBox using Docker on Ubuntu 24.04. I have tested this with Ubuntu 22.04, so it works on both versions. Because we are doing this from scratch, there are dependencies that we need on our Ubuntu server. We need to install Docker and we need Docker Compose. Just a quick note on Docker Compose. There's an older version of Docker Compose, so the syntax for that would be docker-compose. Now the newer version is Docker space compose. The newer version is available in the official Docker repository, not the Ubuntu repo. What that means is that we have to add the official Docker repo, then we can pull this. So let's get started. In my case, I would use an EC2 instance that is running the Ubuntu 24.04 OS. So let's open the CLI for this. So as you can see, the private IP address 172.31.41.43, that right here, and we'll access this using the public IP address. So the first thing I'll do right out of the way is to add our Docker repository, because that's where we would pull the Docker Compose. So we'll add the official GPG key for Docker. Then we can add the Docker repository. I would make all of these commands available to you in the video description. Now that we have this out of the way, we would refresh the list of available packages and versions. So we do sudo apt update. So take just a couple of seconds to run. Once we are done with this, we would proceed to install the latest version of any packages. So we'll do sudo apt upgrade. Now we are being asked whether we want to continue, yes or no. Would say yes. We could have simply passed this yes at the point of running the command. So it will take a while for this to run. The reason we did both of these is to ensure that our system is up to date, is secure before installing any new software like Docker. So 98% progress, we are almost there. In our case, there was a kernel update which will require us to reboot. Because this is a lab or a demo, we could have proceeded without rebooting, but in keeping with doing this from scratch and showing you everything, I'll proceed to reboot. A word of caution, however, if you are doing this in a production environment, make sure that you are able to reboot the server in case it is running any other services. So sudo reboot, it will just take a couple of seconds for this to reboot. Let's see. Let's restart our terminal and see if it's rebooted. So we've rebooted. Our next step is to proceed with our installation of Docker and Docker Compose. So we install Docker. Now we passed the yes to it at the point of running the command. Now, if we had run Docker version before installing this, you would have seen that we wouldn't have Docker installed, but now we have Docker installed. Now we proceed to install Docker Compose. All done. So Docker, not Docker. Docker. So we are good. Next, we want to ensure that when the server reboots, Docker starts automatically and the service also starts immediately. So we'll say systemctl enable Docker and start Docker. If we check the status, we should have the Docker service running. Okay, what we want to do next is that we want to ensure that our current user is able to run Docker commands without sudo. To do that, we would add our current user to the Docker group. Now, if we had done just this, we'd have to log out and log in or reboot before this takes effect, but we want this to take effect immediately. So at this point, we've looked at the dependencies needed to clear. We've looked at the dependencies needed to pull our repo and get going. So our next step, we go and clone the NetBox Docker repository and navigate. So when you do a list, we see the folder here. So we navigate into this folder and we do list. There are two key files that we need to pay attention to. So the first one is Docker Compose.yaml. In this file, we have the services. You can think of these as the images that we'll be pulling from Docker. NetBox, we have the database, caching, Redis, and all of that. Then we also need to create a file which defines the port under which NetBox will be available. Basically, the port that NetBox will listen to. Now, this file must be called specifically docker-compose.override.yaml. If you look at the list of our files, we don't have that file specifically, but we have an example that tells us how that file can look like. So basically, as we see here, we just have the services NetBox and we define the port 8000 and we would stick to this. What we'll do next is to actually write to that file. So now if we do a list, we have docker-compose.override.yaml. And if we look into this, it has just what we need. Next step would pull our container images with Docker Compose pull. So it will take about a minute. We are pulling NetBox, we are pulling the database, and we are pulling caching, as we saw in the Docker Compose.yaml file. Let's give this a minute and we should be done. Good. Now that we have pulled the images, if we do, let's say Docker images, we have our images, but we don't have any containers running. Our next step is to start our containers. The command would use would be Docker Compose app. We can do this. Let me just give some space so that this becomes obvious. When you do this, we'll have all the logs show on our screen. The other option is that we can run this in a detached mode. With the detached mode, we can have access to the prompt. I will run it in the detached mode, then I'll proceed to show you how you can actually check the logs, even the live logs, as this runs. This process of starting up the containers will take about 5 minutes to complete, but I would want to let it go through the process so that we can see how this works, look at the logs, and if there are any errors, we can take note of them. At this point, we could have actually exited out of this and checked the logs, but I would want to wait for about 2 minutes because there is an error message that you would see or may see, and I would want to clarify that so that you're not alarmed when you see that. So let's just give this a couple of seconds. Within 2 minutes, we should see this. You can forward it about a minute ahead if you can wait. All right, if you see this error, this is still running at the backend. The process of bringing up the container images is still running at the backend. And there are some dependencies that are needed before NetBox actually runs. And we saw that here, right? So we said NetBox, it depends on the database and caching and all of that. We can go ahead and check the logs and see what is happening. So if you do Docker compose logs, it will show us the logs. But if you want the live logs as and when it happens, we can add the -f. We are still in the process of setting up the various components. As I said, this will take about 5 minutes to get done, but I would want us to just wait till we see all that is happening, also in case we run into any errors. Now, if you are taking note of our NetBox interface, so you are seeing virtualization, DCIM, then tenancy, IPAM. This sounds familiar, right? When we went here, we saw all of those: tenancy, virtualization, IPAM. So basically at the back end, it is setting up all of these components: VPNs, wireless, tagging. What we expect to see, or a cue that everything is okay, is that the NetBox service is running. So at this point, we've not seen it, so we are still waiting for this to fully complete. All right, so there we have it. We have our NetBox application started. So we are good at this point. So we can come out of this. And now if you go back to our instance, this is the IP address of our instance. And the port we said was 8000. So there we go. We have our NetBox installed. We have our interface, but it is asking us of a username and password. We didn't create one. So that will be our last step. So we run this command to create a super user. It would prompt us for the username, the email address, and the password. So our username, do packets to purpose. Email address. Then you'd enter your very secured password. Let's confirm the password. So our super user has been created successfully. So we go back and we enter our user and our password. So there we go. We have our NetBox instance fully created from scratch. We don't have anything at this point. There are no regions, there are no sites, we don't have any tenants, there are no devices, nothing at all. In our next video, we'll look at adding some data into NetBox, so our sites, devices, and all of that. If you found this interesting, kindly subscribe to the channel, hit like and the bell icon so you don't miss any videos. Thank you.